nothing that rumor called the capital the most amazing place in the empire. Now Lily is destined to enjoy the beautiful view of the local streets every day. For the first time in her life, she sees with her own eyes the beauty that she had previously only heard about from stories. In the place of Her Majesty, who lived here since birth, Lily would have been much happier. However, now that she has moved into the imperial palace, she will be able to see the same things as the Empress. The girl only hopes that the lady's gloomy appearance is not connected with her sudden visit. More than anything in the world, she wants to find a common language with her. After all, they have one man in common. Lily did not choose this role for herself because Emperor Demios himself made her his lover. A few days ago, no one suspected what the imperial advisor's discovery would lead to. At that time, the Empress's personal maid was telling a story about how she had recently encountered a werewolf. This pleasant gentleman was so handsome that Betty's hair turned into feathers. Most likely he was a leopard because these werewolves make the most beautiful men. Although they look like ordinary people, in reality they are closer to animal beings. Finally, the maid suggests adding some decorations to make everything look aesthetically pleasing. Lady Ramodi orders you to choose the most seductive image before meeting His Majesty. Sepia asks not to worry about anything, these are just everyday little things. It is at this moment that the maid delivers news that creates a great commotion. They say that a woman has appeared in the country, on whose body the name of the emperor was found. Thus, Sepia had to personally meet Lily, bringing her to the imperial palace. The mistress arrived here in the Empress's carriage, where previously only family members had been. Demios is grateful to his wife for such participation, but he is a little worried about his guest. She asks to talk a little more about the future life in which a new woman has appeared. Too much time has passed since their last conversation, and her husband stopped paying attention to her. The emperor admits that the rumors about the piece of people marked with names are quite true. Lily's mere presence in his chambers creates true peace. Sepia is almost certain that after their night together, a name appeared on his body too. However, this did not happen, although Lily's name will certainly appear soon. Any woman would be concerned if she found out that another girl had her husband's name on her body. The emperor asks her to finish the conversation if she wishes to touch on another topic. If that's all, it's time for him to get down to his direct duties instead of long tea parties with his wife. I wonder if Demios understands how difficult it is for an abandoned empress. She loved her husband all her life, not knowing that one day fate would turn out differently. Instead of a long and happy life in the palace, Sepia will have to get used to his mistress. Many years ago, when they met for the first time, the young man's words sounded different. Being a werewolf, Demios often appeared to her in his true form, which Sepia liked very much. It seemed as if they were made for each other, even though they were very different in appearance. After all, as soon as Demios took on human form, all differences immediately disappeared. He asked her to answer honestly whether she found the appearance of the white wolf too scary. Sometimes Sepia spent a long time convincing him that in her eyes he would always be the most beautiful. It turns out that all werewolves have names that appear on their partner's body. If your partner's name is imprinted on your body, it means that he or she is destined for you by fate itself. Immediately after this, the werewolf falls in love with his partner, with whom he spends the rest of his life. This news upset the girl a little because a name will never appear on a person's body. In response, Demios asks not to worry about this because the name of his chosen one will appear on his body. Lost in thought about the past, the Empress doesn't even notice the presence of another woman. For some reason, Lily is sure that even during family tea, the Emperor remembers her. This is how the power of a name works. Fate cannot be changed by just your own desire. Because of the mark on her body, the girl wants to be as close to His Majesty as possible every day. If Sepia has never seen the mark with her own eyes, she may well show it. This will dispel any remaining doubts if the Empress is not entirely sure of its existence. Demios' imprint is indeed on this woman's chest, which means she is the chosen one. Lily never thought that the name would appear in such a place, but His Majesty liked it. He said that it was impossible to think of a more suitable place for the name of his betrothed. The girl asks not to worry about anything, because she is quite capable of fulfilling her duty. From now on, she promises to warm the Emperor's bed just as the Empress did before. Having said these words, the girl quickly leaves the guest room, leaving Sepia alone. It's strange that she talks so openly about such things, as if she has a long-standing hostility. It was also strange how quickly Demios shifted his attention to caring for his mistress. He was unhappy that the new woman arrived in the same carriage with his wife. They almost missed each other on the way, because Demios had no intention of getting into the Empress's carriage. Let's note that the husband returned back. The girl asks to explain the reason for such a hurry. Before he could begin, Lily suddenly declared that she was too tired after the long journey. The conversation with his wife should be postponed until another time, and he should take care of the guest. Thus, she is deprived of even the little time that could be spent with the Emperor. Tonight is turning out to be the most terrible night of all Sepia's life. She understands perfectly well that her husband is in the arms of another woman right in the palace. The sheer hostility with which the guest uttered those words was a little alarming. She can't help but know that any woman in Sepia's place would be in terrible pain. It was hard to remember the last time the girl had felt such intense envy, and yet she decides not to be distracted by such feelings and to go about her usual duties. At this moment, Sepia suddenly realizes that she has wandered too far from the imperial palace. Besides, it was so cold here, as if the weather had suddenly changed. There are warm clothes for just such a case, and a stranger may well share them. Roxanne advises against walking in light clothing, as she might get sick at night. Sepia turns around sharply, trying to remember the young man's face. He explains that he got a little lost while exploring the grounds of the imperial palace. It turned out that Roxanne did not know the Empress's face and naively asked to be escorted to the exit. Sepia is ready to help, especially since she is in debt to the stranger for the borrowed coat. Already at that moment, the girl notices too many scars left on Roxanne's body. With his menacing appearance, he resembles a soldier who accidentally wandered into the garden. Not long ago, a large detachment returned to the capital after fighting local barbarians. For some reason, Roxanne is confident that he was able to interest the young woman. However, this was too bold a joke because he knew well the purpose of the necklace. The guy immediately apologizes. He didn't notice the married woman's necklace. Having almost reached the castle gates, Sepia explains how to proceed further. They can pick up the coat next time they walk through the night garden again. Having thanked him for his concern, the girl hurries to the palace, although some of what was said was true. Perhaps he is an important guest and then their meeting will take place at Victory Day. However, the main thing is different, because this man really interested the Empress. Seeing the lady on the doorstep, Betty begs her never to walk alone at night again. However, judging by the presence of men's clothing, she had no intention of wandering around alone. It's a little funny that the sweet lady found a replacement so easily, answering her husband in the same coin. Sepia asks not to talk nonsense. This coat was simply borrowed by an important guest. By the way, she's much calmer now, so there's no need to bring tea into the room. The Empress decides to spend some time alone with her thoughts, getting used to her new life. Previously, all her thoughts were occupied by her husband's mistress, but now another person appeared in them. The impression of Roxanne is completely different from that of Demios because he seemed to have come from another planet. Sepia is not sure that their meeting will ever be repeated, although the coat should be returned. In any case, this is a great excuse for a short meeting, after which everything will be over. The next day, Demios suddenly claims that she pushed the new guest. If we're talking about the incident when Lily tripped, then Sepia had absolutely nothing to do with it. In response, the man reminds that jealousy should not become a cause of discord in the family. He knows his wife's feelings very well, but he cannot ignore the imprint of her name on her body. And yet, Sepia really didn't push his mistress, so there's no point in talking about jealousy. Having calmed down a bit, he suggests forgetting about what happened, since no one was hurt. If Sepia insists on his rightness, he will be forced to conduct an investigation. The girl asks to present evidence of her guilt, if there is any. Otherwise, there is no point in making claims without having serious grounds for doing so. She was already tired of being a silent doll whose point of view was simply ignored. The Emperor is convinced that such a beautiful girl as Lily will not deceive him. At this point, he proposes to end the argument, which will not lead to anything good anyway. Unable to bear the offensive accusation, she says goodbye to her husband, wishing to enjoy breakfast. If Sepia had known many years ago how their meeting would turn out, she would certainly have thought twice. At that time, Demios seemed to be the best on earth and did not resemble the current emperor. Almost every night she came to the lake, and today she simply decided to remember the past. Sometimes it seems to her that even now little Demios will suddenly appear next to her. But instead, a second later, the one Sepia met in the garden appears next to her. This man promised to arrange another meeting and, as usual, kept his promise. Roxanne asks for forgiveness if he scared her a little with his sudden visit. Only the royal family can appear in this place, so it is better to keep it a secret. Having noticed beautiful maple trees in the distance, he simply could not pass them by. Moreover, next to the lake, the guy discovered something even more beautiful than maples. Admiring beauty is much more pleasant if you do it in the company of good people. Due to the lack of acquaintances, Roxanne feels lonely and is glad that they have become friends. He admits that by agreeing to friendship, the girl will do him a great honor. For friendship to be real, you have to reveal your personalities, because you can't pretend forever. This offer was very opportune because he himself wanted to tell more about himself. At this moment, Lily's voice is heard from behind, although it is strange that she is here. Her visit immediately reveals all the cards, making it clear who Sepia really is. Lily was just exploring her new possessions, not expecting that the Empress liked night walks. She plans to clean up the lake by planting camellias and cherry trees there so that it will be beautiful in the winter too. However, Sepia forbids this because the garden is her personal property. It is clear that the young lady is already laying claim to the place of Empress, reshaping the lands to suit herself. Only members of the imperial family are allowed to change anything on the territory. In this case, Lily asks to explain to which family this unknown man belongs. Roxanne introduces herself as a close friend of the Empress, who has simply dropped in for a visit. They were simply strolling along the lake, not noticing the presence of the young lady. Unfortunately, Roxanne can't spend time with Lily because she is only Sepia's friend. Hearing these words, the girl finally understands their true relationship. It turns out that the Empress also acquired a lover after His Majesty's refusal. This is the only way to explain these night walks, which the Emperor doesn't even suspect. In the first seconds, neither of them finds the words to respond to Lily's insolence. Instead of simply leaving, she again starts talking about the relationship of the young couple. The girl seemed not to realize that she was looking straight into the eyes of the first woman of the Empire. She asks not to worry about anything, because this secret will remain only between them. In response, Sepia warns that her words sound like an insult, not support. Lily apologizes, but she didn't mean to hurt the Emperor's chosen one. She was ready to swear that she only wanted to keep the conversation going and was not ready for a quarrel. However, these were the very eyes Sepia saw the moment she first showed the mark. Behind the deep and innocent look of these eyes lies deceit and cold cruelty. Roxanne decides to warn one last time that she is not the Empress's lover. If the lady for some reason saw this as something more than friendship, that's only her problem. Lily has to apologize again, although no one trusts her pitiful appearance anymore. Realizing that it's better to just leave, the girl says goodbye to them, wishing them a wonderful walk. Of course, there isn't a single soul in the capital who doesn't know about His Majesty's mistress. Such an open confrontation with Lily could cause a conflict with the Emperor. Roxanne is flattered by such unexpected concern, but he is used to challenging difficulties. In order to preserve their new friendship, he is ready to take even the most desperate action. Of course, such words cannot help but touch the heart, although she controls herself. As a parting gesture, the young man promises to meet at Victory Day, where he is also invited. With these words, he leaves as suddenly as he appeared in Sepia's life. She doesn't even have time to thank him for his help, but there will still be plenty of time for that. The next morning, the news about the forces suppressing the barbarians is discussed throughout the country. Sepia overhears loud discussions that directly affect Roxanne's life. It turned out that the army had still not returned to the capital on the direct order of the head. Coming a little closer, the Empress asks to tell what else is known about the army. According to her, the army was supposed to return a month ago, and it's strange that this didn't happen. The lady explains that right now a camp has been set up outside the capital's gates, awaiting the Emperor's decision. Instead of simply letting the army in, he ordered them to wait outside the capital. Sepia begins to suspect something, although it would be better to get the answer to this question directly. Suddenly, she hears Lady Ramodi's voice, who is clearly as worried as the others. The woman apologizes for the haste, but His Majesty orders her to appear in the living room. He has hardly visited his wife lately, but now for some reason he insists on meeting. Immediately after this, Sepia heads to the meeting, realizing that Demios has special business. Seeing her husband, she asks him to explain the reason for such unjustified haste. For the first few moments, he silently looks at his wife, as if something had changed in her. Recently, Lily said that she caught the Empress with another man on the lake. No one doubted that she would not miss the opportunity to take revenge for the refusal to go on a walk together. The Emperor demands to know what made his wife go to meet the man. In his opinion, friendship between a man and a woman does not exist, which means it is cheating. Sepia disagrees, insisting that Mr. Roxanne is truly just her friend. At this point, she decides to change the subject a little, remembering the latest news. She asks to cancel the order to wait outside the gate because there is an army of heroes there. These people are as valuable to Sepia as they are to the Emperor himself. The treatment of heroes who sacrifice their lives for the country must be respectful. Demios demands that no one interferes in his affairs because only he is free to make decisions. If she doesn't watch her words, she'll have to punish her own wife. Suddenly, the hair on Demios's head begins to move, as if before the transformation. Unable to continue the conversation, he advises simply listening to the experienced ruler. Then the Emperor won't have to lose his temper after another of Sepia's stupidities. Thus, the first meeting after a long separation again ends in scandal. All this time, Lady Ramoti was outside the door and was able to hear the entire conversation. She will be happy to help if Ms. Sepia gives any special assignment. Sepia asks that an envoy be sent to the gates, informing them that entry into the capital is permitted. With the power given to her by His Majesty the Emperor, Sepia provides the heroes with a place to spend the night. Of course, she is doing a noble deed by allowing the army to enter the capital. However, the main thing is how Roxana managed to enter the palace without permission. It is already clear that he is also part of this army and belongs to the forces of suppression. Meanwhile, the army is still awaiting the Emperor's decision, having set up a field camp. At this moment, the news that the soldiers have been waiting for so long spreads throughout the camp. Officer Kyle reports that the main gates of the Imperial Castle are now open. The dam permission has finally been received, and I won't have to spend my nights on the street anymore. It seemed that the Emperor came to his senses, realizing how much he was risking by leaving his army here. The subordinate warns that with such phrases, Kyle will definitely be arrested at the entrance to the castle. However, they have been in utter hell for 10 years now and deserve different treatment. At this moment, he realizes that Lord Roxanne is still not in the immediate vicinity. It is unlikely that the commander-in-chief of the resistance army will sit out the situation in the palace. Roxanne knew about the opening of the gates before anyone else, because he was inside right now. He is sure that the order to allow the troops through was given not by the Emperor, but by his wife. It was the Empress who allowed passage across the border, placing the army in a separate area of the city. As the commander-in-chief of the suppression forces, Roxanne is ready to give orders to the entire army. He demands that everyone pack their things as soon as possible and return to the capital together. Soon, a lavish banquet is held in honor of the victory, to which the cream of society is invited. Naturally, the Emperor arrived together with the current Empress, leaving his mistress aside. It is not surprising that everyone is interested in looking into the eyes of a woman who has come to terms with her mistress. This is the first event since Lily first crossed the threshold of the palace. To Sepia's surprise, the girl was still there, meaning Demios was about to reveal the truth. In this way, he pays special attention to her, eclipsing the figure of his first wife. And yet, she cannot be given the seat of a member of the imperial family because she has nothing to do with it. Sepia understands that she must remain calm in front of the public at all costs. Almost immediately after the start of the celebration, the main guest of the event appears in the hall. The commander of the suppression forces, who is also the commander-in-chief of the army, was already here. Sepia guessed that this man was one of the commanders, but the truth was more interesting. Only today, during Victory Day, does she learn about Roxana's general title. In other words, there is no senior officer higher in rank. During their brief meetings, the man for some reason hid his title, fearing to harm the Empress. But now there is no point in hiding anything, because the victory has brought even more influence. Even the Emperor is obliged to greet Roxanne with respect, although he is a subordinate. Having bowed to the Emperor, the man briefly reports on the victory he has achieved. Roxanne plans to continue her exploration of mines containing deposits of magical stones soon. 6 such artifacts were discovered at once in the territory of the barbarians captured by the army. In addition, they have long since begun to explore regions that are still not on the map. Even a new mine brings astronomical profits and will be useful to the country. After hearing the report, Demios acknowledges the merits of the commander-in-chief and his brave men. For the courage shown, he is ready to fulfill any wish as a reward. Suddenly, he declares that the blessing of Her Majesty the Empress is better than a reward. This is quite enough to repay him for the destruction of the enemy army. This is not a joke at all, because the bearer of the title of the Star of Ishtar is like a true saint. This holy woman was the one to whom the threads of the revival of the werewolf empire were drawn. It was Sepia that was marked as the Star of Ishtar by the priests of the church and can give blessings. But Roxanne seems to use this opportunity to show her attitude. Never in her life had Sepia blessed a person, but today she could not refuse. She would have expressed her opinion directly if the situation now was a little different. As the star of Ishtar, the Empress bestows her blessing on the renowned warrior. At this moment, the girl suddenly remembers what Roxanne said at their first meeting. He offered his friendship, citing a complete lack of acquaintances in the capital of the empire. Along with her blessing, she wishes the general to find his place in life and loyal friends. Hearing words about friendship, he understands that it was no coincidence that they were said at such a moment. Roxanne swears allegiance to her empress, for whom she will be ready to sacrifice her life. It's hard to remember a moment when the girl's soul felt so warm. Finally, the time came for the ball to open with His Majesty's first dance. As expected, Demios invites the Empress to dance, announcing the beginning of the event. Of course, this was an excellent excuse to talk about my wife's lover again. Having heard gossip from Lily, Demios is sure that their relationship is not limited to friendship. That is why Roxanne asked her for her blessing, knowing that she would agree to do it. The Emperor suggests not hiding the truth from each other when everything is already known. If this is just a passing amusement, he is not at all against giving her freedom. However, Sepia must remember that infatuation will never develop into a real marriage. In response, she reminds him that after all the events, her husband has no right to decide for her. Hearing the argument, Lily decides to intervene, offering her help in resolving the conflict. Demios is glad that the girl herself came out into the hall and will now give the Emperor one dance. In fact, this is a great honor for Lily, because the most noble gentlemen will be looking at them. Looking at this circus, Sepia understands that they are deliberately throwing her off balance. The husband never smiles as sincerely as he does in the presence of his mistress. It's a pity, because once he gave a smile to the one whom he later called his empress, and now Demios seems ready to do anything to use the moment to humiliate her. Of course, the Emperor's new chosen one will never be deprived of the attention of social ladies. Just recently, these individuals were circling around her, but now they have chosen a new favorite. Even Lilia's parents were invited to the Victory Day celebration, rejoicing at their daughter's success. It seems her parents are trying their best to make the most of her situation. And yet, it always seemed before that the Emperor was the most magnificent man. But if you compare him to the Duke, Roxanne is much more popular with the local girls. He is probably even more handsome than most of the women gathered in the imperial palace. Both men have the blood of divine beasts in them, so it's perfectly normal to compare them. At this point, Lily's mother, for some reason, suggests a match for the lonely empress. The woman is confident that her eldest son would be a perfect suitor. Count Louvre also believes that she simply cannot find a better gentleman than Gilad. Most likely, they don't really understand who exactly they are offering such a strange service to. Suddenly, the conversation turns to the fact that a few days ago, the gates were still closed. The Count is convinced that the decision to open the gates was made by His Majesty the Emperor. As it turns out, Lily's white doe is a perfect match for his true nature. The name on the body of the beloved daughter did not appear by chance, it is a divine manifestation. Lily suddenly announces that it was she who made the decision to let the resistance forces through. Of course, this is a blatant lie, because Sepia had to quarrel with her husband to get this permission. By appropriating the merits of others, this girl wants to earn the respect of the nobility. She assures that this is just a trifle, and that anyone in her place would have done the same. Overhearing the conversation, Kyle loudly declares that the order to let the army through came from the Empress. The Commander-in-Chief knows this better than anyone and can easily confirm it. It's all thanks to Her Majesty the Empress, otherwise the army would have remained outside the gates. Roxanne expresses gratitude for the assistance on behalf of the soldiers and on her own behalf. This is the second time that evening that this man has shown his attention by raising the name of Sepia. Not all the ladies of the court had yet gone blind, so as not to see the obvious superiority of the Empress. The Emperor's mistress is quite cunning, but she is not destined to get around Her Majesty. And yet, just a minute ago, Lily dared to lie to their faces, claiming she had opened the gate. Instead of earning respect, she receives a portion of disdainful looks. Without thinking twice, she reminds him that it was she who first spoke about this with the head. It seemed to her that the request for passage of the troops was immediately fulfilled by His Majesty. Kyle isn't entirely sure the Emperor would talk about such things in the bedroom. This remark immediately puts the girl in her place, pointing out her main purpose. She probably never felt so humiliated during her life in the palace. Count Louvre is quite capable of explaining how to treat his beloved daughter. However, it would be better if it cooled down a bit and didn't spoil the Victory Day celebrations. He had just called Roxanne's people barbarians, and yet it was the barbarians who were the enemies of the Empire. Noticing the commander-in-chief's predatory gaze, the man's expression immediately changed. He was so stunned that he immediately forgot the threats against Officer Kyle. The Count asks forgiveness for his insolence, promising never to say anything like that again. It's a good thing his wife was nearby, otherwise the scoundrel wouldn't have gotten off with a simple remark. Lily also apologizes for her father. He really did behave quite rudely. As a sign of reconciliation, she offers to dance one dance, forgetting about the little incident. However, Roxanne intends to dance her first dance with the Empress, who has blessed him. In his eyes, this young woman is the main benefactor of the Empire. Thus, Lily's humiliation continues, as she is denied the dance. Such men are unlikely to fall for pathetic fabrications about the name of their chosen one. Roxanne is free to choose her beloved herself, without relying on the decision of some supreme power. During the dance, Sepia suggests that they forget their mutual grievances, since she too had kept silent about the title. He reminds that he gave his real name, which his mother gave him in childhood. Since they have become friends, Sepia can do without unnecessary formalities. It would be better if she simply called Roxanne by her first name, as close people do. All this time, the Emperor does not take his eyes off the main dancing couple. The Duke is known to have considerable influence and should not be treated with disdain. Having suggested that they retire to another room, Demios welcomes the Empire's protagonist. He is glad that the Duke returned from the campaign alive, bringing with him victory over the barbarians. However, Roxanne must know that even a brilliant victory over the enemies will not change anything. He wandered through foreign lands for too long, which means he will never become emperor. But you can rest assured that Demios will play this difficult role perfectly. Finally, he reminds Roxana that the Empress will always belong to him alone. At the same time, Count Louvre is restless, remembering his conversation with the Duke. This boy dared to humiliate him in front of high society, demanding that he apologize for what he said. His wife once again asks him to calm down. He has already made a lot of noise. At such moments, another wife would support her husband instead of making stupid reproaches. Finally, unable to bear the screaming, Lily decides to calm her parents down. She doesn't want to spoil the mood on the day she attended the Imperial Ball for the first time. If they truly love their daughter, Lily hopes they will stop fighting all the time. Family members should protect each other and not look for a reason for another scandal. The Count didn't even notice how their little girl grew up and became a wise young woman. However, His Majesty will arrive very soon, which means they had better leave the room. Not daring to object, the Count heads towards the door, not forgetting to grab a bottle of wine. Lily waits for a while until her parents close the door from the other side. The girl held back her emotions for a long time, but was no longer able to maintain a calm appearance. After experiencing horror, you want to destroy everything that comes your way. She is irritated by literally everything connected with the Imperial Palace and its guests. Noticing that the servants are standing idle, she orders them to quickly remove the broken things. Only now is the true nature that has been hidden deep inside for a long time beginning to emerge. This girl always feels much better after hurting another person. She steps with all her might on the maid's hand, while there was a shard of plate under her palm. The unfortunate woman barely holds back a scream, not wanting to provoke the mistress even more. That's better. Now she is completely calm and ready to meet His Majesty. Lily had long been accustomed to acting this way, especially if her actions went unpunished. Someday she dreams of doing something similar with someone who has been a pain in the neck for a long time. Meanwhile, the Emperor is in his chambers, wanting to take a little rest from the hustle and bustle. He is slightly surprised that the girl shows up uninvited without waiting for the visit. Lily decides to visit herself since His Majesty is too tired from the celebration. If he feels unwell, she knows one way to quickly relieve male fatigue. His body is more reminiscent of a sculpture by a brilliant master, and as always attracts attention. One day she decided that Demios's body would belong to only one woman. Lily admits that she waited too long for his visit and missed him greatly. It's strange because she usually behaves quite reservedly when she's alone. Unlike one person, her behavior always seemed exemplary to Demios. Having mentioned the woman, she immediately understands who exactly His Majesty means. And yet, the name itself seemed to control her body, wanting to constantly be near Demios. Therefore, Lily promises to follow the call of the mark, because this is its main purpose. For some reason, the girl thinks that the Emperor loves stupid and weak women. That is why she decides to always remain submissive, doing whatever the master wants. This is the only way to achieve your goal of removing the current Empress from the throne. First of all, to do this you need to get the Emperor, and there are no problems with that. A little more, and he will start begging Lily to never leave his room. By finally breaking ties with the Empress, she will get everything she dreamed of. On the third day of Victory Day, there were even more guests than on the opening day. It felt as if noble families from all over the country had gathered at the palace. It's a little sad that on such a day, for some reason, Roxanne didn't come, leaving her alone. Suddenly, Sepia realizes that she is thinking about this man in a wrong way. She apparently forgot that they were just friends and were not obliged to see each other every day. As expected, instead of the Duke, a whole crowd of gentlemen comes running, inviting him to dance. They staged a real competition for the right to be the first to dance with the Empress. The eldest son of the Count of Louvre was also there, assuring that his position was much higher. He believes that the first dance should be given to him, discarding other offers. At this moment, the ladies of the court begin to talk about some rumors connected with the Empress. According to rumors, different men emerge from Sepia's chambers every night. Upon learning of this, her husband will certainly excommunicate the young woman from the imperial family. This state of affairs is entirely to the advantage of the person who is diligently spreading these rumors. Not long before this, Lily, as if by chance, starts a conversation with one of the maids. Before she could finish speaking, her face became so gloomy, as if the girl knew something terrible. She admits that the latest news cannot be encouraging, especially about the Empress's betrayal. Lily confides that Sepia has so many men that it seems like she changes them every night. Only this secret must remain between them, otherwise the Empress will suffer. Lily begs not to tell the other maids at the imperial palace. As expected, by the evening literally every maid in the house finds out this dirty news. Moreover, the girl herself told all the courtiers about this. The Empress will be saddened if their little secret becomes public knowledge. Lily said the same phrases over and over again, knowing that it only fueled interest. Looking her straight in the eyes, she expresses joy for the Empress, who has become popular with men. Suddenly something happens to her personal maid, who was waiting nearby for Sepia. The young man was so clumsy that he knocked down the poor girl on level ground. Betty doesn't immediately understand what happened to her, but Sepia asks her to remain calm. Galad is sure that the maid who blocked the road is to blame for everything. Sepia demands that she not speak ill of her maid and apologize immediately. By his actions, he dared to insult Her Majesty's chief maid. The young man immediately apologizes. Everything happened so quickly that he didn't have time to react. Meanwhile, if the rumors about the constant change of men are true, Galad offers to negotiate. The Empress will not regret letting the best gentleman in the country into her bedroom. After hearing the shameful proposal, Sepia promises that Galad's rudeness will not be forgotten. Someday he will regret that he decided to offend the honor of the first woman in the Empire. However, it happens that punishment overtakes the guilty party much earlier. For a long time, Roxanne stood nearby, wanting to hear every word. The next time they met in a deserted place, he would remember every word. And now the Count's son can get lost, awaiting his unenviable fate. Much becomes clear, because the commander-in-chief would not have given such an honor just like that. If the rumors were true, he would never have stood up for Empress Sepia. The officer gives his word that her honor will be restored, and the culprit will be severely punished. However, she will have to deal with the rumors herself, because it is known who is spreading them. Rumors passed between people can sometimes be quite significant. That is why Roxanne did this in front of the courtiers, refuting the gossip. The young man offers to use his name if Sepia has any goals. He will pretend to be her lover so that over time the fiction about the girl's adventures will cease to exist. If he always stays close, today's incident will never happen again. Meanwhile, the Emperor continues to keep an eye on them, becoming increasingly dangerous. He himself renounced his wife in favor of his mistress, but now he does not intend to give her freedom. And yet the girl agrees to the proposal, especially since it's just a game. Having heard consent, he decides to start right now, inviting the girl to take a short walk. Let all the guests at the celebration see that the Empress has a permanent gentleman in her life. Her husband, among other things, will not fail to notice this, regretting Sepia's betrayal. It must be said that the move turned out to be quite successful, because Demios really does become enraged. The main thing is that the game doesn't become too serious, otherwise the Emperor will become your worst enemy. Coming out into the garden, for some time Sepia cannot understand why they came to this place. He is sure that the night garden is the best place for two lovers to meet. Walking through the garden at night, they can easily convince the local nobility of their relationship. Suddenly, the girl asks to answer whether Roxanne has a partner somewhere on the other side of the country. Such assistance would be disrespectful to his bride, even if he helps the Empress. Once upon a time, the Duke actually had a beloved woman, but it all ended unsuccessfully. For reasons beyond Roxanne's control, they had to separate forever. Too much time has passed since then, and he has no right to go back. Sepia is convinced that even after many years, the girl is still waiting for his return. She probably said it a little incorrectly, because she herself would have waited for the Duke. At this moment, some strange sounds are heard from the bushes behind. There is clearly a man and a woman there, doing something indecent. Such sounds can easily embarrass a well-mannered person, especially in the presence of a man. Unexpectedly, the Duke offers to take advantage of the opportunity by reinforcing new rumors. If they were noticed at such a moment, the palace guests would immediately spread the news of their relationship. This may seem a little unusual, but this is how they guarantee the success of the idea. At some point, Roxanne comes so close, as if he was actually going to act. The young man asks you to play along and not worry, trusting him completely. A moment later, his lips almost touch Sepia, almost kissing the girl for real. The young people immediately recognize the Empress, whom they accidentally spotted with the Duke. Roxanne came up with the perfect plan. They really believed in the truth of the relationship. Now that they were found in each other's arms, rumors would quickly spread throughout the palace. It's hard to understand what he really has in mind and whether he wants to limit himself to simple fun. As usual, Roxanne behaves very reservedly, pretending to be a friendly friend. Although any girl knows that such a friendship with a man quite often has a continuation, yet his plan worked perfectly when they returned to the palace from the palace garden. It is impossible to miss these two, as they stand out from the rest. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that the Duke is the new lover rumored to be there. Apparently, now they will stop making Sepia into an image of a woman who cheats on others with multiple partners. After walking around the hall for a bit, she suggests going to a place where there will be fewer spectators. The balcony is the best place when you want to escape the hustle and bustle. Besides, here you can just drink wine to celebrate a small victory. Sepia is a little worried that the Duke will have problems after everything that happened. However, he himself offered to use his position to help dispel the rumors. There is great doubt that the reason for such selfless help lies in simple friendship. Suddenly, she hears again the female voice that she tried to forget, at least for a while. After following a pair of lovers, Lily brought the Emperor with her, exposing her wife's infidelity. However, Sepia's new relationship has long been no secret to His Majesty. She no longer has to hide from anyone, which she openly tells Demios. In response, the Emperor asks not to speak about this so directly in order to preserve the honor of the imperial family. In fact, in this way, she simply dispelled dirty gossip. Roxanne decides to intervene, admitting that it was he who suggested this cunning plan. If the commander-in-chief intervenes, no parasite will dare to tarnish her name. So it would be quite reasonable to identify the source of the false gossip. The following gossip could defame the name of any member of the family if it continues. At this point, Lily asks to go to another room because it's getting cold on the balcony. Finally, he warns that all the people who had connections with the Duke were dead. She probably doesn't want to be among those unfortunate people, so she should think about it. He said this with a clear intention, but still the phrase sounded quite convincing. Roxanne asks to wait a little if the Empress does not wish to return together. She is ready to do as he sees fit, assuring him that her husband's words had no effect. In fact, Sepia remembered the last phrase from the Emperor's lips for a long time. Even after several days, she feels awkward, although she skillfully hides it. Demios really did have the ability to speak in such a way that you had to decipher the meaning of the words later. With his warning, he hinted that intimacy with the commander-in-chief would end in death. Sepia decides to talk about this with Lady Ramodi, who has lived in the capital for many years. She is probably well aware of Roxanne's fate and knows what will reveal the truth. At one time in the past, her mother was the princess's chief maid of honor, passing on this role to her daughter. She tells how the Duke used to be an unhappy boy about whom rumors circulated. The Emperor's father Demios had a brother into whose family Roxanus was born. Initially, the throne was supposed to go to him since he was the eldest child. But he refused the throne, although the real reason is still unknown. When Duke Roxanne was born, His Majesty Demios's mother saw the child as a threat. One day he fell ill with a mysterious disease and was bedridden for several years. The parents knew about the fears of the previous empress, so they decided to remain silent. Unfortunately, they died from an epidemic, although there are many gaps in the story here too. The boy survived only because he was studying at an academy abroad at the time. The subjects began to suspect the heir, who was the only survivor in the family, of everything. At some point, rumors began to spread that he was the cause of hunger and disease in the country. In addition, dead animals and unknown symbols were found in the heir's room. When the maid first told about it, the rumors began to be accepted as truth. However, the Duke, whom Lady Ramodi had known since childhood, could not have been involved in such a thing. Perhaps some things become clearer, and she thanks the nice woman for the detailed story. Lady Ramodi is certain that Sepia has the right to know the truth about Duke Roxanne. Understanding her hint, the girl assures that in fact she and the Duke are just friends. In any case, the maid will support any decision of the young mistress, whatever it may be. However, Betty had already brought with her a guest, who was the main character of the story. How strange that at this very moment he appears next to her and intends to stay with her. Roxanne greets her Imperial Majesty, addressing her according to all the rules of etiquette. He asks to give him just 1 minute, if it does not distract from important matters. Soon they arrive in a large hall, where no one will disturb them while they talk. This man must have really had a very hard time, since he spent his childhood under the yoke of the Empress. More than anyone else, he should understand the feelings of the one whose own husband has turned away from her. The Duke warns that he may not quite understand her gaze if she does not change it. In fact, he doesn't mind such views, even if they are friends. If Sepia had any Bremen black tea, he would gladly drink a cup. Luckily, the tea issue is much easier to resolve than their new relationship. Most werewolves don't like this tea, and it's strange that the Duke likes it so much. It turned out that this tea was the favorite drink of Roxanne's ex-lover. Then it is understandable why he treats a completely ordinary variety with such respect. Sepia likes it too, but it's not just about choosing tea. Finally, the conversation turns to the main thing, because the Duke arrived at the palace for another reason. He wants to borrow a map of the Imperial Palace for a while, if the girl doesn't mind. For a long time, the Duke has been searching for the missing relic of his late father and is sure that it is here. The entire area has long been rebuilt, although some things still remain untouched. If there is a compelling reason for the search, she is ready to give Roxanne a copy of her map. In response, he promises to provide a weekly report on the progress of the search for the relic. You can be sure that the card will be safe and will not be lost during the search. Sepia guesses that he is simply looking for an excuse to meet more often. Meanwhile, a lot of snow has fallen outside and he suggests taking a short walk. As expected, the Empress does not mind walks in the fresh air at all. She enjoys walking around the winter garden, especially when she has a pleasant companion in her company. All his actions indicate that the Duke wants to continue meeting with the Empress. At this moment, Roxanne notices one curious thing that only he can see. If Sepia looks the other way, she can easily spot the new guest. And indeed, not far from them there is a fox, as if not noticing the presence of people. Perhaps this fox is a werewolf and can take on human form. However, it is foolish to think that an adult would want to be pampered like a child. The fox waits patiently for the young girl to show her concern by stroking her head. It feels like she is not afraid of the Empress at all, but rather feels something very kind. A creature that comes into your hands so easily may turn out to be a lost pet. However, domestic pets do not behave as aggressively as this animal towards the Duke. Just a minute ago she was acting like a house cat, but only in the case of Sepia. The girl asks not to take this to heart, because the animal's behavior is unpredictable. Meanwhile, the fox's attitude towards Sepia did not change one bit as soon as she touched him. This time, Roxanne decides to do something a little different, quietly sneaking up on the animal. Noticing his movement, the fox again shows aggression, not wanting to get closer. A second later, the girl can only look at the fluffy tail of the fleeing creature. The Duke had no intention of scaring him, but now his rival was unlikely to return. Sometimes jealousy can arise even between friends if a woman appears between them. It's a little funny to start a conversation about jealousy after meeting an ordinary fox. The Duke wants to be the one the young Empress likes more than a forest beast. With this phrase, he utters for the first time rather bold words that cannot be understood otherwise. Just one walk through the winter garden becomes the starting point in their new relationship. A short time later, a loud voice is heard in the office of the Crude family mansion. Jasper is already used to his little brother's strange antics, but he never ceases to surprise. He decides to appear completely naked, claiming that he has become a real man. Jasper doesn't doubt his brother's humanity, but asks him to get dressed first. Until Etensel was over 20 years old, he was unable to take on human form. However, today, for the first time, the boy saw something else in the mirror besides the fur of a red fox. Etensel is sure that it was the Empress who turned him into a human after one touch. Up until this point, he had tried hundreds of different potions and spells, but still remained a fox. Jasper was tired of repeating that every werewolf acquired the ability to transform differently. It is worth forgetting forever about the connection with the Empress, otherwise this venture will end badly. And yet the brother cannot help but notice how beautiful his new human form is. Etensel is convinced that with such an appearance, Her Majesty will immediately like him. In addition, Sepia's name may appear on his body, as happened with the Emperor's mistress. He doesn't seem to understand that a person's name never appears on a werewolf's body. I'll have to get rid of my main rival, whose scent still lingers in my nose. Even if it means fighting, Etensel has enough strength for the duel. If the brother does a small favor, he promises to become the Empress's new lover. He asks to be taken along when Jasper visits the Imperial Palace. By that time, the young people had already returned to the house, deciding to have a little fun. It's great that both of them knew how to play chess. It helps while away the evening. It should be noted that the girl made rather complex moves, as if she was learning from a master. Time after time, anticipating her opponent's mistake, Sepia brought victory closer. After Roxana's last move, she no longer doubts who will take victory in the game. Checkmate was entirely expected, especially since he had lost the previous 2 games. Roxane assures that after 3 lost games they are obliged to meet again. It would be too cruel if the Empress did not give him the opportunity to get even. The pretext for meetings has always been a map of the palace, but now the Duke replaces it with a game of chess. Surely, as soon as her father's relic is found, Roxane will return to her native lands. However, the people of his region still believe that he was the cause of the plague. Sepia believes that one day all misunderstandings will be resolved. He must have been simply set up, causing devastation in order to gain power over the lands. At this moment, Lady Remoti quietly announces His Majesty's arrival at the palace. She asks to tell her husband to wait a little while for her return to the room. However, the Emperor was not used to being the one who had to wait for his own wife. Entering the living room, he sees the very sight that his personal maid tried to hide. It is not surprising that the maids conceal the Commander-in-Chief's visits to the Empress. Sepia tries to explain that during their visit they only played 1 game of chess. It's funny when adults act like children and want someone to believe it. Demios understands perfectly well that there was something else planned besides the game of chess. However, a husband does not need to look for stupid excuses to simply visit his wife. She quickly asks Roxane to leave the palace before the Emperor does another stupid thing. If this is what the Empress wishes, he dare not disobey the order. However, both understand that the order was a simple formality, but the relationship was different. Finally, Sepia asks to come back next time when Roxane has finished searching. It's strange that the girl is so worried about the search work in the palace. Yet her meeting with the Duke was not so necessary as to make her husband wait. She needed to discuss something in private, but it was none of His Majesty's business. But no matter how often she met with Roxane, it was half as often as his meetings with his mistress. Demios won't be able to deny the fact that he just returned from her palace. As soon as a mistress appeared in the house, family relationships turned into a simple formality. It is surprising that her husband began to worry about meetings with Roxane and her personal life. If he despises his own general, he will soon lose the support of the army. She is convinced that the Duke is not to blame for the terrible plague that occurred in his region. Demios reminds that every husband is obliged to worry about the fate of his wife, and if the rumors about the Duke's guilt are true, her name too will be tarnished by the shadow of this man. Sepia doesn't believe in stupid excuses because he hasn't looked like a loving husband for a long time. From her words, it becomes clear that Sepia does not consider this man a good friend at all. He decides to explain a little differently what obligations bind members of the imperial family. The Empress has no right to behave too freely, dishonoring the honor of the head of the country. If over time she began to forget who her husband was, he would easily remind her of it. Because of the strong grip, the girl cannot even move, as if she was grabbed by a wild animal. However, he continues to insist that the overly capricious Empress needs to be calmed down. After all, it had been too long since they had been alone together as legal spouses. There was something important that Sepia knew from the start and was willing to accept. A mistress remains just a mistress, but family ties have a completely different value. It was a pity that the Duke's frequent visits had made her forget this simple truth. Having said these words, he extends his hand to the girl, hoping to feel reciprocity. After all, spouses often quarrel with each other, but this is not a reason for separation. Sepia warns that after the appearance of a mistress, their relationship will never be the same. To clarify the situation a little, he reminds that it was Sepia who renounced him first. But there couldn't be a better time to start over. The Emperor still remembers the mutual vows they made to each other. They vowed to always stay together, even if fate threw them a test. Realizing what Demios is trying to achieve, the girl asks him not to do it right now. She is not ready to forget the grievances so quickly and pretend that the relationship has remained the same. With his words, the Emperor alludes to the night when they were to consummate their marriage. He is sure that she has not yet forgotten the wonderful night they spent together 5 years ago. Today, Sepia simply could not accept him, although duty commanded her to be submissive to her husband. It was an almost instinctive rejection that had never happened before. Demios decides to remind her that carrying the heir to the throne is her direct responsibility. However, she suggests that he turn to Lily if he is looking for a partner in bed. With such a refusal, she treats the Emperor like an ordinary pet. Surely the Duke is not yet aware that his Empress is barren. It should be remembered that this secret is known only to him, but can be disclosed. Only her legal husband has the right to touch her, and Roxanne is just an ordinary officer. The girl begs him to stop, because after this she will definitely not forgive the humiliation. Demios' mistress has long since replaced his legal wife, and he cannot divide his life in two. Continuing to listen to the pleas, he decides not to deny himself a little pleasure. Any husband has the right to share a bed with his wife as long as the marriage is legal. Instead of rejecting Sepia, one should forget foolish pride and remember who she is. In fact, she is ready to do anything, just so that this nightmare ends forever. Demios finally realizes that his wife is too scared by the proposal. Intimacy is impossible when, instead of accepting, your spouse is shaking with fear. He asks you to think carefully about what was said and not let the Duke near you again. Fulfilling direct responsibilities is much more important than fleeting relationships. After some time, the noise died down a little and quick footsteps were heard in the room. The Emperor hurries to leave the bedroom, not even realizing who is waiting for him outside. It was incredible that this man dared to come here at such a time, knowing of his presence. Instead of long conversations, Roxanne decides to explain differently what happens for such treatment. He actually dared to raise his hand against the Emperor, who had lost the last of his sanity. The Duke should have died of the plague long ago, but for some reason he still remains alive. He reminds that he always remains true to his words, so he was obliged to return. He warned that the meeting with the Emperor on that fateful day was not the last. Even if that were the case, Demios is certain that his brother will never rise to the level of Emperor. The Empress will forever remain his wife, and he can only watch from the sidelines. After some time, the weather began to change, bringing warmth to the capital's residents. And that's exactly how it happens, because before you know it, winter is already coming to an end. Betty doesn't understand why her mistress is still sad in such wonderful weather. Perhaps the reason was the news of His Majesty's departure with his mistress. However, this is not the issue at all, because her relationship with her husband has long ceased to worry her. Most likely, Sepia is most worried about the words spoken by the Emperor before leaving. Then he stated that he regarded his wife's actions as an evasion of her duties as Empress. Sepia has not yet given birth to an heir, and in a sense this man's words are true. At that moment, they notice new guests at the palace who had never been there before. Captain Jasper did not come alone, although they met the second gentleman's face for the first time. The girl respectfully greets the hero of the Empire, who has recently returned from a campaign. She wants to know the name of the second guest, who is probably related to the Imperial Army. It felt as if Ettenzel had prepared himself in advance, posing as a military officer. The guy couldn't wait to meet Her Majesty in person, to whom he dedicated the victory. There is no doubt that Sepia sees him for the first time, although something reminds her of their previous meeting. The warrior was so eager to visit the palace that Jasper had no choice but to take him along. Additionally, Jasper would like to apologize for the incident that occurred during the holiday. On the day Galad pushed the Empress's maid, someone posted a huge deposit for him. He was released after just a week, with all expenses covered by the Emperor's mistress. Sepia begins to understand where the money Demios gives his mistress goes. As the event manager, Jasper apologizes for any inconvenience caused. A special apology is being sent to Her Majesty's Lady-in-Waiting, as Betty suffered the most. It was obvious how much these words moved her, as did the officer himself. As for Eatansel, the girl asks him to explain what reason brought him to the palace. It turned out that he had been looking for a long time for a little fox cub that had been spotted in the garden. If we are talking about that red fox, then the Empress saw him quite recently. Eatansel asks for help in finding his favorite animal, otherwise he will be left completely alone. She was the last person to meet him in the Imperial Garden. Of course, Sepia cannot refuse such a small request from the hero of her country. Along the way, the young man thanks her for her kind treatment of the animals she cares for. In fact, this cannot be called real care, because the girl simply stroked him. Eatansel sadly recalls the day when her pet suddenly disappeared during a walk outside. It seems he could have jumped into the carriage when his brother was just leaving for work. Finally, they come to the place where Sepia met the missing fox. Suddenly, the guy admits that his pet really loves blue-eyed beauties. Nothing special. The fox just changes his behavior abruptly when he meets such a girl. As you approach the bridge, it becomes clear that it is still too slippery after the winter frosts. We need to come up with some way to get to the other side safely. Eatansel suggests holding hands and covering each other in case of mistakes. The problem is that the girl feels disgusted by physical contact with a man. The only time this feeling doesn't arise is when she's next to Roxanne. But now I have to answer something, because I can't admit it straight to his face. Sepia, gathering her thoughts, tries to overcome her long-standing disgust. Her hands were so cold, as if the girl was seriously ill. This is how the body reacts to the touch of a stranger, and the nerves reach their limits. However, the path on the bridge is indeed very slippery, which means you should hold on tight. Instead, she is only able to touch Eatansel's palm with her fingertips. However, if you walk carefully, you can cross the bridge quite safely. After taking just a few steps, the foot hits a slippery surface with unfortunate luck. Surprisingly, instead of cold ice, the girl feels someone's hot body. It is obvious that there is a third person nearby who happened to be nearby in time. He had warned her many times to be careful when Sepia wandered around the garden. Icy paths are especially dangerous, as you can easily hit your head. These are indeed very true words, but it is unclear how the Duke managed to be nearby. Many years ago, when she was just a child, a completely different person showed concern for her. When going outside, Demios demanded that they walk more carefully, knowing about Sepia's unruly nature. It feels like the incident has repeated itself again, because then the boy uttered these words. Noticing that talking was no longer useful, he quickly grabbed her hand. Demios was tired of warning how dangerous the icy winter trail could be. Hearing this, in the first seconds, she decided that it was Demios who stood behind her. However, the voice belonged to Roxanne, who repeated the boy's phrase word for word. Every day, more and more questions arise, and the Duke's identity becomes shrouded in mystery. It's good that in the end, nothing happened to her, and the walk through the garden ended happily. You need to pull yourself together, because anyone can simply advise you to tread carefully. Meanwhile, the second son of the Claude family should not spend time near the Empress. It would be better if the young man searched for his missing fox in splendid solitude. Unlike him, the Duke does not need to look for a far-fetched excuse to meet with Sepia. Eatansel is still too young to understand how others might interpret their walks. In response, he asks not to treat him like a child and to behave more politely. However, Sepia is also forced to take her leave because a meeting with the Duke is scheduled right now. She had already spent quite a lot of time with him, which in his position was a great honor. In this case, Eatansel promises to visit her the next time the girl is free. With these words, he quickly heads towards the gate, forgetting to say goodbye to the Duke. And yet Roxanne still hadn't answered how he got into the garden so quickly. It is a rather secluded area in the garden, not accessible through the main gate. It turned out that the maid of honor, walking with Jasper, had divulged the whereabouts of the lady. The Duke decides to warn that even behind an innocent face, there is sometimes a real predator hiding. You always have to be on your guard with young men, especially ones like Eatansel. She is sure that the young man just wants to be a friend, without wanting anything more. You can often hear words about friendship, although any man understands what the truth is. Roxanne wants to be the only friend who is allowed to spend time with her. She had wanted to confess something before, but always put off the uncomfortable conversation. The truth is that some statements are so overt that they can lead to misunderstandings. In response, the Duke assures that he has never been one of those men who throw words to the wind. You can trust him completely, especially since he is quite capable of supporting the Empress. At this point, Sepia changes the conversation by asking about his lover. Surely he has already found the girl who was waiting for the Duke in his native lands. You should have thought twice before asking about such personal things. It turned out there was no secret about it, since the girl had been married for a long time. Sepia apologizes for asking such a frank question. She upset him again with memories of the past. Roxanne blames only herself for everything, because she should have arrived home much earlier. However, he intends to check whether her new partner is a worthy man. In case he turns out to be a scoundrel, the Duke knows what to do. Still not understanding what he is hinting at, she asks him to tell her his plan in a little more detail. But such conversations sometimes lose their meaning, especially since they have already come to their place. Before it gets too late, Roxanne invites her to go home and meet again tomorrow. The palace map is indeed very necessary, but today was already a busy day. Having wished each other good night, they promise to meet at the same place in the Imperial Garden. Meanwhile, His Majesty is not at all bored, spending nights with his mistress. Lily thanks him for the honor, because the Emperor brought her to a wonderful place. She admits that before she could only dream of such happiness with him. Now she clearly understands that the relationship with the current Empress is spoiled. Otherwise, the Emperor would not have shown her so much attention, showering her with gifts. In the end, it was Lily who came to this villa, and not the abandoned Empress. She must have missed out on a lot in life by spending her time so wastefully. There are times when even the snow outside the window looks more beautiful than usual. Previously, the same snow had filled her heart with fear, because it had caused trade to be cancelled. In the past, this led to even greater problems than the impoverished settlers had to endure. The good news is that rumors were circulating about a new orphanage being built by Her Majesty. While Lily lived in poverty, struggling every day for a piece of bread, the Empress led a life of idleness. The construction of the shelter seemed to her a vile hypocrisy, since for the gentleman it was a small expense. From then on, she decided that there would never be another day when she would have to walk through dirty snow. Demios is a little surprised by her behavior, because she always finds reasons for a little joy. Unlike Sepia, she is grateful for every little thing and is not used to complaining about life. However, the Emperor is right about one thing: Her Majesty really does treat her badly. Perhaps she didn't like Lily from the first day they rode in the same carriage. Demios has long believed that this woman loves no one but her new lover. For the first time in a long time, he spoke about his wife in a tone as if he still missed her. Then the girl decides to change the subject, reminding him about the cleansing ceremony. She will be happy if His Majesty takes her with him and allows her to participate in the sacred ceremony. He is forced to refuse, since only members of the imperial family are allowed to attend this ceremony. It's a pity, but right now Lily is a commoner and does not have access. No outsider can enter the underground temple without the direct permission of the goddess. This is the first time this has happened, because Lily has never asked for something like this before. However, we can return to this conversation a little later, but now something else is important. Demios admits that she always gives him satisfaction like no other woman on earth. For Lily, this is a great joy because this is her destiny. The name appeared on her body only recently, but the girl felt as if she had been feeling the chosen one all her life. The next morning, everything went as usual, and Lily spent a long time preparing for the meeting. At that moment, she hears the loud voice of a maid who reports strange news. A certain gentleman decided to come to the villa, assuring that Lily had been waiting for him for a long time. Having opened the door, she doesn't even have time to look at the one who decided to annoy her since the very morning. It was necessary to find out from the maid in advance what the strange guest looked like. Most likely, Lily would not have decided to attend this meeting, which would not bring anything good. Greeting the young lady, Master Blair is glad to find her in good health. A few days later, the capital of the Empire prepares for the Great Purification Festival. There is perhaps only one person in the country who is not happy about this event. Sepia remembers the last look with which the Emperor said goodbye at their last meeting. She is relieved to be separated from her husband, but today she cannot refuse a personal meeting. Betty decides to support her, declaring that it is impossible to find a more beautiful woman in the entire Empire. With such compliments, Sepia doesn't even have time to notice who is approaching them from the front. For a long time, the Emperor has been waiting for her at the entrance to the temple, gradually becoming worried. There is no doubt that she has not forgotten the importance of the ritual, although now he is no longer sure of anything. Demios suggests that they forget about their personal troubles for a while, because soon they will enter a sacred place. You can't enter such a place with dirty thoughts and mutual accusations. There was truth in his words, because this ritual is considered the most important of all existing ones. On the day of purification, what awaits the Empire over the next year is determined. At the moment of the ceremony, the Emperor and Empress plunge into the sacred lake. The lake is located right in the temple, which adds special significance to the ceremony. There they spend the whole day together, washing away all the accumulated dirt from their souls. It is said that the underground waters that fill the cave flow into the sea after its completion. Suddenly, the girl reminds that she has never seen a real sea in her life. Of course, it's not worth talking about on such a day, but she really hadn't seen the sea. When Sepia was very little, he promised to take her to the shore of the largest sea. If she agrees to perform the duties of the Empress, this will become entirely possible. However, earlier when they were children, he did not set any conditions for giving a gift. By the duties of the Empress, he means the birth of heirs to the throne. But looking at him now, the girl is no longer sure whether she will be able to accept the current emperor. At this moment, something strange happens to him, as if the temple has a destructive influence. This is the first time this has happened, because all these years he has felt only awe here. It seems that Sepia's guesses were correct and the transformation will begin any minute. We need to get him to the shore as quickly as possible before the transformation happens right in the lake. At the last moment, the girl manages to grab her husband, pushing herself towards the shore with all her strength. Demios's body burned so intensely, it was as if he had developed a severe fever. It seems he is no longer able to answer any questions and only makes unintelligible sounds. Sepia promises to return in a few minutes. He should be patient a little. The guides are still waiting near the entrance to the cave. It won't take much time. At this moment, he asks to wait, begging not to leave at such a moment. If he is destined to die during the ceremony, he prefers to be with his wife. It's strange that he spoke about death, although transformation is a completely normal phenomenon. Demios admits that for a long time he did not understand who the person closest to him really was. It is dangerous to leave him in this state, even if he came to his senses for a moment. However, if Sepia wanted to leave the cave, she should have done it a little earlier. Judging by the Emperor's appearance, it becomes clear that his human appearance is gradually being replaced by that of a beast. Outwardly, he still remains human, but the entity seems to begin to speak for him. Looking her straight in the eyes, Demios demands to know who her only man is. It's stupid to ask about this in a situation where her life depends on the answer. Unable to lie in a sacred place, she prefers to simply remain silent. Such silence can only mean one thing, which is completely infuriating. The Emperor no longer wants to control his inner being and follows the call of instinct. Sepia begs him to stop, otherwise the sacred rite of purification will end in death. She can barely breathe, feeling the hands tightening around her fragile neck. For the last time, Demios gives her a chance to come to her senses and recognize him as the only man. He is convinced that she belongs only to him, no matter what the relationship in the family may be. Otherwise, it will not go to anyone and will remain forever within the walls of the cave. True, the dead Empress is unlikely to interest her young lover. A moment later, the look completely changes and the beast lurking inside reveals its appearance. Sepia tries her best to reason with her husband, as she can hardly breathe. The girl will remember for a long time that terrible moment when the essence of Demios manifested itself. He actually strangled his own wife, intending to commit suicide. Fortunately, he came to his senses in time, finishing the purification ritual earlier than expected. After making sure he can walk, Sepia suggests they walk slowly to the palace. It is obvious that he does not remember anything at all, as if he had been unconscious the whole time. Right at the exit of the cave, someone has been waiting for the ceremony to end for a long time. Far away from themselves, they hear a familiar female voice that cannot be confused with another. Lily behaves in her usual manner, worrying about His Majesty's poor health. Ignoring the Empress, she behaves like a legal wife. Meanwhile, Sepia explains to those accompanying her that her husband briefly lost consciousness. According to her, it happened by accident and there was no need to report it in the newspapers. Suddenly, the Emperor begins to behave strangely again, as if the transformation had not yet finished. It feels like two opposing principles are fighting inside this person. If so, then the beast's nature takes over the humans when Demios addresses Lily. Right before her eyes, he does something he would never do in a normal state. The Emperor announces that Lily belongs only to him. Of course, she completely agrees and is ready to be next to His Majesty until the end of her days. However, in his gaze one can read only contempt in response to the Empress's choice. Demios asks her not to look at him as if she saw a terrible monster in him. In fact, this is a very correct statement. This is exactly how a legal husband behaves. All the I's have been dotted, and it's clear that their previous relationship can no longer be saved. The emperor decides to address the people, although the ceremony does not at all require a speech. According to him, this year they will face a huge misfortune that will befall the entire country. The empire's fortune in the new year is predicted by one of 5 omens. However, during the ritual, Sepia saw nothing like this. Great luck is symbolized by a special light that appears directly in the sacred temple. This is the miracle for which the ritual was originally intended. A great misfortune can be compared to a war or a crisis in terms of the scale of the disaster. The people of the empire know very well that the country has always been fortunate since the advent of Sepia. Realizing that he is giving false information, she suggests that they return to the house as quickly as possible. It will be much better this way, even if the emperor leaves the temple accompanied by his mistress. Meanwhile, the Duke is in his office listening to reports from his advisors. After studying the map of the palace, they came to the conclusion that it was simply impossible to complete Roxanne's task. In this situation, almost half of the palace's territory is inaccessible for study. Even if there is a relic of the Crimson King somewhere inside, it cannot be detected. In response, the Duke orders the search to continue, even if they are looking for a needle in a haystack. He cannot help but understand that endless searching will still prove futile. However, he returned to the city only to return the relic of his late father. Living out his last days, the father asked his son to fulfill one important request. He claimed that one day the darkness would subjugate the red-eyed divine beast. If this happens, no one will be able to prevent the destruction of the empire. Therefore, it is Roxanne who must find the seal and its twin, hidden in the imperial palace. Their strength is quite sufficient to protect the entire empire and Roxanne personally. The red eyes that my father warned me about only suggest one person. This beast in human form is the current Emperor Demios. The Duke requests that all news occurring in the imperial palace be reported. 2 weeks had passed since the ceremony had ended, but Sepia still had not appeared. Kyle asks not to worry too much because now the Empress has more worries. After the announcement of the disaster, she must be very busy and her absence is quite normal. The subordinate simply does not understand that the matter is not at all about searching for his father's relic. Looking at this moon, he increasingly remembers their walks together in the garden. In other words, Roxanne simply wants to see her, knowing that Sepia is okay. Kyle was right about the work falling through after the great disaster was announced. The lower class will suffer the most, because it is the poor who feel the crises most acutely. We'll have to forget about all the innovations for a while the country is in danger. However, the Empress herself is also in danger, judging by recent events. She still cannot forget those moments spent with her husband in the cave. It's scary to imagine how it all could have ended if the Emperor had not come to his senses. Sepia sincerely wants to forget about it, but the body has not yet forgotten the moment before death. At this moment, a messenger asks for an audience, wishing to convey something. It is strange that at such a late hour His Majesty's messenger should show up to see her. The young man apologizes for the unscheduled visit, but he could not disobey the order. The Emperor issued a decree prohibiting the creation of charitable departments. He cites a lack of funds, although Sepia understands that it is not about money at all. Immediately after this, she wants to personally ask her husband about this, who deprived the beggars of help. Noticing her in the hall, he suggests getting straight to the point, without wasting time on formalities. He is not going to deny the fact that the decision was made without the help of advisors. However, Sepia understands perfectly well that charity is needed to support the lower class. It is very important to have such an agency, especially in times of serious crisis. Demios is a little upset that his wife only turns to him for help with these issues. She asks not to change the topic of conversation, because rulers are obliged to protect their people. Her compassion was commendable, and even Demios appreciated the Empress's efforts. Perhaps this is exactly what a true ruler of a great country should be like. In fact, with this praise, he is desperately trying to offend Sepia's feelings. Meanwhile, in recognition of her boundless generosity, he is ready to make concessions. As Emperor, he will ease her burden as much as his position as head will allow. All funds allocated to charity will be transferred to the mistress. Lady Lily will surely find a suitable use for them by buying herself a new carriage. Sepia asks not to talk nonsense, because among her subjects there are people with great experience. It is simply absurd that instead of the imperial advisors he chooses a young girl. However, Demios insists on his decision, entrusting Lily with managing the budget. In conditions where the fate of the empire is under threat, the weak lose the competition to the strong. With these words, he seems to hint that of the two companions, it is Sepia who is weak. Money that could save the priceless lives of numerous citizens was given to a mistress. Suddenly, Demios decides to change his mind, retaining her control. Having thanked her husband, she once again warns that she lives for the sake of her people. Personal relationships cannot be mixed into matters on which people's destinies depend. According to Demios, the issue is not about the relationship at all, but rather that the empress is offended by the emperor. A country cannot prosper when the ruling family is in decline. Finally, she begs to cancel the decree on budget redistribution. In return, Sepia promises to provide as much funds as Lady Lily wishes. However, a promise alone is not enough to seal such a deal. First of all, she is obliged to fulfill her marital duty if she intends to achieve her goal. Otherwise, the beggars will be left without proper assistance, and the money will be given to Lily. There is only one way to accomplish what you have planned, but for this to happen, you need to do something. The emperor asks to appear in his chambers, promising to wait for Sepia until late at night. Once on the street, she thinks for a long time about His Majesty's vile proposal. In order to save his own people, this man sets conditions. If you think about it, by working on a charity, she is taking on the responsibilities of a ruler. Anyone else in Demios's shoes would be grateful to their wife. However, lately he has been acting as if he enjoys causing pain. It seems she made a big mistake in her choice when she married this man. Nothing can be turned back. All that remains is to fulfill one's duties to the end. It is at such moments that people appear nearby who later become close. When she saw Roxanne for the first time, the girl did not immediately trust his courtesy. Back then, he was no different from other men wanting to get her attention. But now, looking into his eyes, she realizes how poorly she understood people. Every time he comes at the most difficult moment of life, wanting to share the difficulties. She didn't even notice his presence, too deep in thought. In response, he asks to calm down a little because all problems are eventually solved. Besides, there is nothing shameful in tears because sometimes even men cry. Every day he becomes more and more outspoken, not wanting to remain a simple friend. There is no doubt who Sepia would choose if she had such a choice. After a short pause, the Duke suggests returning to the house and drinking hot tea. Surprisingly, the girl found the regular jasmine tea much tastier than the previous one. Just recently she was crying right in the arms of this man. Roxanne apologizes for not being able to bring her to a larger room. He would have suggested the living room, but there was almost no furniture left there right now. The truth is that the girl is not interested in the room's decor at all, but in something else. The Duke doesn't even try to hide his feelings, but it all started as a funny game. He asks that any problems be reported, no matter how big they are. His position is quite high, even if he has to face the Emperor himself. After some thought, Sepia admits that this winter has stirred up her feelings. Although she maintains a reserved demeanor, her insides are turning upside down after recent events. In her position, any woman should thank for everything and leave silently. However, she has been with the Duke for a long time and has no intention of interrupting the meeting. It seems they are both beginning to understand that today's meeting could be something special. Sepia is not at all embarrassed, even when the Duke looks straight into her eyes. He suggests playing a game where everyone must share their secret. In the past, she often played it with Demios when they were just kids. Roxanne admits that in the past, due to memory problems, he did not keep his promises. Perhaps this is why the Duke broke up with his beloved, although this is no longer important. It took a lot of effort to regain control of my own memory. But the heart is still tormented by regrets because of the mistakes of the past. This is actually quite a frank admission, and now it is worth responding in kind. Sepia admits that she feels anxiety and fear when she is around the person closest to her. Perhaps this fear is much stronger than in the presence of strangers. After hearing the revelation, Roxanne thanks him for his honesty and adherence to the rules of the game. She does it very well, even if the girl is actually playing it for the first time. A week later, Sepia visits the main building of the shelter, where the department is located. As usual, the manager personally greets the Empress's carriage, expressing deep respect. The Viscount is pleased that she still manages the affairs of the department, determining the budget. 8 other managers are already waiting for her inside. Everything is ready for the meeting to begin. Once in the deliberation room, she realizes that things are much worse. Every county manager believes that he or she should receive the funding. Some centers will soon not even have water left to distribute to the poor. The Viscount asks for silence. One must control oneself in the presence of Her Majesty. Sepia insists that each district is of great importance to the entire organization. Therefore, you can be sure of help. You just need to wait for the results of the meeting. However, if they strictly adhere to the diet, they can only last for 15 days. The shelter will be the worst off, as that region is the poorest of all. The number of poor people is growing every day, and the budget has been handed over to the Emperor's mistress. There is nothing left to do but reduce the amount of food in aid centers. If she agrees to enter Demios at night, all the problems with funding will be solved. Sepia had given in to her fears hundreds of times, but now she had to be brave. She asks the managers not to lose heart. Help will arrive soon. Suddenly, a noise was heard somewhere in the street, as if a detachment of soldiers had arrived there. Not understanding what is going on, the Viscount asks his assistant to check the situation near the building. However, Sepia decides to do it herself, wanting to see the reason with her own eyes. It's incredible, but someone sent a huge number of crews to the department building. Inside each of them were various supplies that were so necessary for the organization. The girl is sure that the supplies were brought from the main warehouse, although the Viscount has nothing to do with it. If the CEO didn't give the order, then someone else did. The only question is who needed to help the charity. At that moment, she notices the familiar face of a young knight who has arrived with gifts. Kyle claims that it was Roxanne who ordered the supplies to be delivered to the department building. However, he may well say this personally as soon as he appears here. Turning around, Sepia meets the Duke, who is actually involved in this. One day he asked to talk about all the problems, no matter what they were about. Ultimately, without even being asked, Roxanne decides to take on the supply problem herself. He explains that he came only to return the rent for the palace. It was Sepia who allowed the search for the relic to begin by sharing her copy of the map. Kyle confirms the commander's words, because real men always repay their debts. It must be said that help is really needed, although she hardly expected to see something like this. The Duke offers to speak privately as the head of the foundation with the main patron. It's a pity that there was no suitable place for such a conversation. There is only this barracks, where no leader would invite a sponsor. And yet Sepia asks to answer honestly what this whole story with the delivery of supplies means. He didn't want to do anything special, and the delivery was just a contribution to charity. Usually the Empress readily accepts donations from wealthy nobles. The money is used to help the poor, and there is nothing wrong with that. But such assistance could lead to conflict with His Majesty if he finds out about it. Roxanne decides to tell the truth, since the conversation turned to the Emperor and his attitude. They have not gotten along well for a long time, so the Duke is used to constant reproaches. One more reproach against him will not change the overall picture, so there is no need to worry. Instead, it's better to think about their own relationship and future together. For the first time since we met, Roxanne behaves so openly, without even choosing her words. He no longer wants to hide his feelings, forever hiding from the Emperor's supervision. In the end, His Majesty had already made his choice, giving preference to his mistress. In the Duke's opinion, Sepia should not suffer under the oppression of Demios, wasting her life in vain. With its help, she can forever get rid of the burden that constantly pulls her to the bottom. Besides the supplies, he has something else that might be of interest. Opening the documents, Sepia sees a huge donation from the Duke. This is too much money, considering that he does not belong to the nobility. This amount also includes donations from his knights, and the boys did not remain indifferent either. If the Empress does not accept their modest contribution, it will cause discontent. In fact, the knights did it from the bottom of their hearts, wanting to help impoverished people. In their place, anyone who bears the title of knight with dignity would have done the same. Of course, Sepia cannot ignore such a generous gift, having agreed to sign it. Moreover, the amount is quite sufficient to cover expenses for 2 years in advance. She thanks the Duke for his help, although he will hear these words from the orphans many more times. It turns out that he really was able to overcome problems with memory and unfulfilled promises. Having promised to help her with any problem, Roxanne kept his word with dignity. He asks Sepia to take care of herself, because the people need a wise ruler. However, as in a strong ruler, although the girl prefers to remain silent about this. A few days later, another boring meeting took place at the Imperial Palace. As before, Demios is thinking about something completely different while listening to the reports of the district heads. His Majesty does not look pleased that he cannot please his subordinates. The reason is the news related to the funding of a charitable foundation. Duke Roxanne decided to become a philanthropist, donating a huge sum to help orphanages. while the emperor redirected the entire fund budget to his mistress. When the citizens of the country get together, they constantly gossip about the affairs of the emperor. The bad news is that the treasury budget has been sharply reduced after the nobles refuse to help. Upon hearing the news, Demios's mood becomes even worse than it was at first. He suggests ending the meeting by postponing the discussion until next time. Things are going so badly that you want to destroy everything that comes to hand. Noticing the blood, Lily asks to explain what happened to His Majesty during the meeting. She demands that a doctor be called immediately before the wound becomes infected. At this moment, a woman appears in the hall because of whom everything went wrong. Demios hopes that she will now be satisfied with having achieved her original goal. But whatever their relationship, he was the first to threaten to refuse help. We are talking about people in need, so his actions are not worthy of a true ruler. And yet, someone is spreading a rumor that the budget has been handed over to Lady Lily. The emperor suspects his wife of being the one spreading dirty rumors about this girl. Once again, Demios, without reason, accuses her of something she never even thought of doing. Without any evidence, he dares to denigrate the name of the empress in front of the courtiers. Having said these words, Sepia asks the maid to accompany her to the main gate. After close contact with the commander-in-chief, she began to behave more boldly. She is no longer embarrassed by the fact that her mistress is constantly next to her husband. On the same day, the empress visited the shelter where she sent her aid first. As a sign of gratitude, the children treat her to sweets, trying to please the empress. Sepia is truly glad that no sweet child will have to go hungry again. This thought makes her the happiest person on earth because she is not living in vain. And all this became possible only thanks to Roxanne, who gave me a shoulder to lean on in time. While discussing minor matters with the Viscount, he is constantly distracted by someone more interesting. Choosing the right moment, the Duke gives a sign that only she will understand. There is only one place where they will definitely be alone without prying eyes. It seems as if the sky was just as beautiful on the day they first met. Sepia admits that she hasn't seen such happy children as those in that orphanage for a long time. As her most devoted friend, Roxanne helped her in an almost hopeless situation. She understands that she is in great debt to the orphan's main benefactor. At this point, the conversation abruptly ends, which gives rise to some thoughts. For a long time, the Duke did not dare to speak directly, fearing to appear too frank. Yet he helped the charity not only because of his simple friendship with Sepia. Surely his feelings were clear without words, although both preferred to remain silent about it. But this moment had to come someday, because you can't hide all your life. Roxanne reminds that no man will help a woman without a reason. The reasons may have been completely different, but his intentions were pure. The Duke wants to be the closest person and see Sepia every day. She understood this from the very beginning, but in her position, a connection with the Duke was impossible. The Empress knows not only herself, but also her vengeful husband very well. Therefore, she is unable to accept the offer, no matter how much her heart desires it. Roxanne is truly the best man she has ever met in her life, but Sepia has already chosen the path of the Mother of the Empire, which she intends to follow to the end. The Empress is convinced that outside of this path she has no real value. When she hears a refusal, Roxanne promises to wait, even if it takes forever. He read the feelings that Sepia holds in her heart and knows that their love is completely mutual. Whatever the answer, the Duke will protect her, because this is his main desire. In return, Roxanne only asks that he not push her away, but allow her to be near him. The next day, there was even more work, which gave me a little distraction. Betty asks not to skip meals, otherwise the lady will become completely thin. After all, the more work there is, the more energy is required to complete it. The problem is that Sepia's concern is no longer limited to the work of the charity. For the first time in a long time, a person appears in her life from whom she doesn't want to run away. Her thoughts are interrupted by a maid who announces the arrival of the Viscountess. The visit was quite unexpected, since this woman preferred not to leave the district. However, today she came on business, wanting to personally contribute to the development of the foundation. Viscountess Swan is considered one of the most powerful women in the entire empire. She always behaves modestly, although her donation cannot be called as such. It feels like the Viscountess is deciding to give away all the wealth she has accumulated over her entire life. She explains that the old woman does not need this money, and the children will remember her with kind words. Moreover, the palace has a special meaning for her, as she was previously a maid of honor to the Empress. It was the previous Empress who allowed her to get back on her feet and acquire all this wealth. She will always be on Sepia's side, no matter what intrigues the current Emperor may have. It seems His Majesty does not like charity projects since he refused funding. It's true, that's why Sepia has to rely solely on donations from nobles. For some reason, the Viscountess is sure that the Empress now has much greater influence. It seems that with such statements, she is undermining Demios's authority. Finally, the woman thanks him for his time, but it's time for her to go back. At this moment, Lady Ramodi appears in the hall, afraid of being noticed. Sepia had long noticed the strange behavior of the maid of honor, who was avoiding the Viscountess. It seems these ladies had a common past that divided them in different directions. After waiting for the lady to leave, she slowly approaches Her Majesty. Sepia is quite pleased with the conversation that has developed, but the maid's strange manner makes her think. She asks to speak about it directly if something is seriously bothering the woman. It was visible how she timidly opened the door to the hall and then waited a long time for the Viscountess to leave. Perhaps there are problems that the girl is not even aware of. Suddenly, Lady Ramodi falls to her knees, begging the young mistress not to be too angry. The truth is that there is some important information that she deliberately kept silent about. When rumors began to circulate that the Duke was summoning demons, she too fell for the gossip. Until her mother revealed the truth to her, the woman continued to believe that Roxana was the culprit of the plague. One day, her mother saw in the basement of the palace an unknown symbol that was found in the Duke's room. This mysterious glyph is clearly connected to the demonic entity living inside the palace. Sepia must know that it was the late Empress who spread the rumors about the Duke. This was part of a plan to remove the legitimate heir and place his son on the throne. The next day, returning to that place, she accidentally met the Viscountess. But the basement was already completely empty, as if someone had deliberately destroyed the traces. It must have been Viscountess Swan who took with her all the evidence that pointed to the Empress's involvement. He and his mother had no choice but to remain silent for years. Lady Ramodi apologizes for deciding to reveal the whole truth after so many years. Judging by what Sepia learns from the lady-in-waiting, she should keep this woman away from her. And yet, right now, the Viscountess dislikes Demios, which means they have a common goal. Meanwhile, Lily's young guest is in no hurry to leave the palace because the matter is not yet finished. He would not have shown up without a good reason, knowing what the meeting with the Emperor would lead to. It must be said that the hostess is not at all against his visit, although it is rather unexpected. The guy admits that Lily looks much better than on the first day they met on the street. Then she created a completely different impression and certainly would not have been able to please the Emperor. It was Master Blair who was able to provide the service that helped the girl get into society. This gentleman's oddities were always a little scary, although he really did help Lily. The young man asks to tell a little about the Emperor and his attitude towards the name. The girl is sure that Demios is charmed by her appearance, although he has been a little irritable lately. As for the name, he is absolutely happy because now His Majesty has found his betrothed. Lily intends to give birth to a child before the Empress, giving him an heir to the throne. Once the child is born, she will become the Emperor's full wife and the new Empress. It had been her long-time dream, although the mere thought sometimes made her shudder. If you remember, her path began with ordinary trade, where Lily sold flowers all day long. After another unsuccessful day, a strange gentleman approached her, offering his services. From afar, he noticed a beautiful child who had no place on a dirty street. Such dazzling hair is completely out of place here because she is supposed to be in a luxurious hall. After this, Master Blair proposed to become the Emperor's wife, replacing the current Empress. Of course, the poor girl had no choice but to trust in fate. And yet the name has become too faded and may soon disappear completely. If this happens, the Emperor will not keep her in the palace, but will return her to her previous place. Once a month, he used magic to restore the engraving of the name on Lily's body. It was always a slightly painful process, but at the same time quite exciting. So it took him less than a minute to fully restore the name. With every step, Lily gets closer to her cherished goal and soon intends to become Empress. The Master has always liked werewolves who are true to their desires until the very end. He warns that right now the engraving is at the peak of its magical power. If one enters His Majesty's bedroom, he will never be able to resist the temptation. Dark magic never fails, unlike the spells of incompetent wizards. Following the advice, Lily heads to the Emperor's chambers. As she entered the room, she seemed to smell a strange smell that had never been there before. At this moment, the girl realizes that the rumors about the Emperor's transformation were true. Taking a step, something hard appears under my feet, as if Demios had made a mess. To her horror, the entire floor was stained with the blood of slaughtered animals, and the smell spread even stronger. If she had been an ordinary socialite, she would certainly have lost consciousness. Having come to her senses a little, the girl decides to go forward, where His Majesty is. The corpses of the slain animals were scattered everywhere, as if a cruel maniac were living in the room. There is no doubt that the animals were killed by a predatory beast, which means it should still be here. There is only one way to find out, although the truth is unlikely to bode well. Turning around, she suddenly realizes that she decided to appear before the Emperor at the wrong time. It was Demios who was the very same predatory beast that brutally killed these creatures. The partial transformation has reached its peak, and it seems the Emperor has lost control of himself. Lily begs him to answer what happened to him and why he created this nightmare. According to Demios, he lost consciousness for a moment, and when he woke up, he saw this. More than ever, he needs help. Otherwise, the mind will be completely taken over by the inner essence. Many girls would probably prefer to run away, but a new chance appears for Lily. Embracing the Emperor, she vows to always be by his side, no matter how sinister his appearance becomes. She will always be on his side, and the maids will never know what happened in the chambers. Lily will take care of this. His Majesty can rely on her completely. It is unclear whether Master Blair has anything to do with this, but this evening changes a lot in Lily's life. The next day, construction of the shelter is in full swing, slightly ahead of schedule. Sepia is confident that at this rate they will be able to build the building before the start of the summer season. As expected, Roxanne often appears in this place as the main sponsor. Greeting the Empress, he promises to speed up the construction if necessary. However, everything is going quite well anyway, so there is no point in bothering the local workers. After the incident when the Duke swore to always be there, their relationship changed. It felt like the girl had started avoiding him under the guise of having accumulated work to do. Sepia asks her to forgive her, but business simply does not allow her to waste time on a long conversation. By the way, she almost forgot something important since the Duke was here. This is an invitation to a charity event. Sepia simply has to hand it over personally. Roxanne thanks for the invitation and hopes to attend the event as a partner. Understanding his hint, she warns that this is about a partnership in a charitable matter. She is so excited, as if meeting the Duke is happening for the first time in her life. Unlike Sepia, he acts quite confidently, knowing the reason for her anxiety. He admits that such reactions from the girl make him the happiest man on earth. After all, they can only mean one thing, and it would be worse if Sepia behaved indifferently. He agrees to accept the invitation to the event, but only on one small condition. This time the Duke will accompany Sepia in full view of the guests if she does not object. Meanwhile, he seemed to accidentally touch her face with his lips, without paying any attention to it. That same evening, everything was ready for the event, which was attended by the cream of society. It was Roxanne who sent the banquet dress, although she had not worn such outfits for a long time. He arrived at the festival much earlier in order to prepare in advance for his meeting with Sepia. Noticing her in a dazzling outfit, the Duke cannot say a word for some time. He didn't expect that the dress could change the Empress's appearance so much. Not understanding what was going on, she asked him to explain his strange silence. Perhaps she looks a little strange and Roxanne just doesn't want to say offensive things. Instead, he begins to utter a whole mountain of compliments, taking the girl by surprise. It should be noted that he chose a rather successful dress that suits her perfectly. It turns out that blue is the favorite color for both of them. Previously, only her husband could accompany the Empress, but now this great honor falls to the Duke. Seeing the new couple in the hall, guests comment on how wonderful they look together. Sepia dedicates the first toast to all those who have shown such compassion for the charity. Let the warmth of the hearts of good people soften the winter and turn all misfortunes into ashes. All the guests of the event who became benefactors joined in the Empress's words. However, besides sponsors, there are other people who want to attend today's celebration. It is known that it was the Emperor who was a staunch opponent of funding. It is even more strange that he decided to come to the charity evening. Gradually, the situation begins to heat up, because everyone knows His Majesty's character. Demios tried to interfere with the work of the charity and could ruin everything. He immediately felt the hostility of the guests, although they tried not to show it. The Duke decides to remind everyone that the reception is organized for patrons by special invitation. It's hard to talk about it, but His Majesty's name is not on the list of invited guests. Having heard a direct hint, he decides to rectify the situation by making a contribution in his own name. Thus, he will also be considered a patron of the arts, having donated a large sum of money. Now Mr. Roxanne will certainly not be able to object to his presence. It's a rather mean move, but after that the Duke can't ask him to leave. Before the Emperor's visit turns into a scandal, something needs to be done as quickly as possible. Sepia thanks His Majesty for the honor, offering to join the celebration. However, Demios did not come at all to drink wine in the company of his wife's allies. He wanted to see the Empress, even if she was a little unhappy about the visit. Since he had paid his own price, the Emperor should be honored with Sepia's attention. You can continue this game forever, but you shouldn't forget who her legal husband is. Even the mistress understands that such actions can spoil relations with the nobles. Her Majesty has powerful allies who will not forget Demios's insolence. After all, Sepia is not an auction lot that the Emperor bought. If that is the value of the donation, she is willing to return the check to its owner. Finally, Roxanne decides to intervene in the dispute, knowing full well how it could end. The request to behave with restraint sounds like an order that he dared to give to the Emperor. Demios also has one request, although it is better to discuss such things face to face. With each passing minute, the guests become more and more worried, even though the holiday had started off well. Just one person can ruin what many people have been working towards for years. Roxanne herself can barely contain her emotions, not wanting to cross the line. Taking matters into her own hands, Lily suggests leaving the room, otherwise gossip will spread across the country tomorrow. However, dirty rumors had already spread throughout the Empire when the Duke appeared in the Empress's life. He demands that she not interfere in something that is not her business, otherwise Demios's anger will spread to her. After some time, Sepia manages to take her husband out onto the balcony, away from public eyes. If he wants to say something, she asks him to do it now, while there is time. Demios is a little upset that she doesn't have enough time to talk to her own husband. She used to act completely differently when they were just starting a relationship. But over the years, he began to feel how Sepia was gradually cooling off, hiding behind work. Demios must admit that his current wife has disappointed him to the core. Moreover, she called her relationship with Roxanne just friendship, but eventually became his lover. Together with him, she created an absurd organization, inventing a reason for joint meetings. Sometimes it seems that Sepia never opened her heart to her husband the way she opened it to her lover. Behind these accusations, the girl clearly hears the voice of resentment, hatred, and love. All this time, he was putting pressure on his wife just to attract more attention to himself. But the past doesn't matter, because what's important is what's happening right now. Without listening to the end of his words, she assures him that the past is also of great importance. To win her heart again, Demios was willing to condemn his own citizens to death. He took all of the fund savings from last year, knowing that people were dying of hunger. He threw them off his shoulders the way most werewolves shed unwanted fur. However, the beggars who are in such need of help are needed by her and the patrons in the guest hall. If the Emperor doesn't care about the fate of people, he is quite capable of simply not interfering with the work of the fund. Otherwise, Sepia will never forgive the act that Demios committed recently. In their dispute, there is no winner and loser. There is only the duty of true rulers. Sepia has no intention of taking personal relationships into a direction where they are completely unnecessary. Suddenly she notices how Demios decided to show tenderness by touching his wife. However, this gesture is best addressed to the mistress, because Lily is still waiting in the living room. Sepia doesn't want to play stupid games anymore, especially since there's not a single spectator here. She will play the role of Empress only to maintain stability in the country. At this point, the girl suggests ending the conversation, otherwise the guests will start to worry. It is unlikely that the day will come when Sepia will open her heart to the Emperor again. With these words, she quickly leaves the balcony, finding herself in a lighted hall. Perhaps these words should have been spoken much earlier, when the relationship had reached a dead end. The Duke was very worried, fully aware that the conversation with his husband would be serious. He asks not to go out into the cold like this, otherwise the temperature will rise the next day. In response, the girl thanks him for his concern, but today he needs to get some proper rest. She asks for some warm jasmine tea if it is not too much trouble for the Duke. Roxanne suggests finding a more suitable place for tea. They had already been in such a situation once, and then he also treated them to jasmine tea. Roxanne admits that her last words sounded rather ambiguous. At first, the girl said that she was very tired and wanted to rest a little, and just a few seconds later she asked to make jasmine tea. It sounded like she wanted to be invited into Roxanne's room like last time. There is nothing wrong with asking for privacy. It is just an idea that occurred to the Duke. Hearing this, Sepia suddenly gets up from her chair, as if Roxanne's remark had reminded her of something. In fact, the room became too hot, although words also mattered. The Duke asks you to be careful, because recently terrible rumors have been spreading around the capital. In case all these rumors are really true, you shouldn't open the windows wide. Not understanding what rumors are being discussed, the girl asks for a little more explanation. It turns out that animal carcasses are being found in the Imperial Forest, and their numbers are only growing. Judging by the marks left on the victims' bodies, a dangerous predator had taken up residence somewhere nearby. The coincidence is quite strange, because she had heard something similar just recently. However, it is simply impossible to raise a huge predatory beast on the palace grounds. Demios is almost certain that there is a werewolf living nearby who has lost control of himself. Predators do not kill without special need and will not exterminate everyone indiscriminately. If the wounds are identical, then suspicion will fall on the individual, not the pack of animals. However, if Roxanne is right and it is a werewolf, then only one creature comes to mind. The situation is extremely dangerous because even during the ceremony, Demios did not contain the essence. Be that as it may, the monster must be caught and brought to justice according to the law. The Duke promises to join in, helping in the investigation of the high-profile case. He does not want to see the shadow of worry that darkens the face of the beautiful Empress. In fact, this conversation simply cannot end with a discussion of the news. Quite recently, a lady who is connected to the Duke's past visited Sepia's house. For a long time, she could not understand the reason why Lady Remoti avoided the Viscountess. Sepia decides to tell everything that her maid of honor told her after the noblewoman left. After listening to the story, he admits that his parents had spoken about the late Empress before. Now it is clear that their fears were completely correct, because she was spreading rumors about the Duke's curse. This was partly the reason for moving to another place, although this was not the only reason. There are other problems that Sepia probably hasn't heard about. He promises to tell everything in order when the moment is right. Thus, Roxanne openly admits that she has many secrets. Surely this is about something very serious, otherwise he would not have kept silent about it. That night, the girl could not sleep for a long time, trying to unravel the secret of the Duke's family. Suddenly, a noise like knocking on glass was heard from the window. Taking a closer look, the girl notices a forest animal lurking outside. The animal whines so pitifully that it is impossible not to let it into the room. It turned out that the same fox who had disappeared some time ago had found Sepia again. It used to seem like meeting him was just a coincidence, but that doesn't happen twice. He behaves like a normal pet, not even trying to slip out of your hands. For a long time, Sepia searched for the fox together with his owner, but now he decided to return on his own. Suddenly, the fox breaks free, as if not wanting to become domesticated. If so, he shouldn't run inside the palace because there are palace servants everywhere. For some time, the girl cannot understand what is causing his strange behavior. However, after a few seconds, a man emerges from around the corner who is definitely not a servant. Sepia begins to guess who has been hiding behind the guise of the forest animal all this time. The werewolf decided to commit a daring act by sneaking into the Empress's bedroom. Etenzel asks him to forgive her, but he didn't want to put the girl in such an awkward position. Instead of apologizing, he should explain why he pretended to be a domestic fox for so long. The guy insists that there is no other way to express his feelings to the girl. It would be a mistake to think that he was trying to deceive her, because his feelings were quite sincere. Since birth, this werewolf has suffered from an illness and has been unable to take on human form. Even as an adult, he continued to be a fox, unlike everyone else. However, it was the Empress who made him human by touching him just once. Etenzel is convinced that he would still be a fox if she had not cured the disease. It is difficult to understand how she managed it, but the Empress clearly has a gift for healing. And indeed, she remembers very well that little fox she saw on a walk. The girl simply stroked his head, after which he hurried away. And now, having assumed human form, Etenzel intends to confess his feelings. He loves her not only as a ruler, but also as a woman who saved his life. Until he returned back to his animal form, he considered himself completely healed. The problem was that Etenzel was never able to turn back into a human without her touch. So if Sepia is not around, he will remain an animal forever. The guy begs not to turn away from him at a time when no one else can help. It would be rash to touch him while he is in the form of a grown man. But if Etenzel takes the form of a fox, she is quite ready to stroke his head. Having thanked the Empress, he promises to find out how long the transformation effect lasts. Sepia warns that she will only touch him when Etenzel is a fox. More is not required, since the problem was only with the human appearance. In response to the help provided, the guy promises to repay with the same kindness. Meanwhile, they talked all night, waiting for the sun to rise. If Ettenzel met the courtiers in this robe, they might get the wrong idea. Fortunately, a werewolf doesn't have to go through the door when there's an open window. Now Sepia has another worry to deal with, although she has had plenty of them lately. Having quickly jumped down, the guy remains on the territory for some time. The first part of the plan is complete. Now you just need to continue your hypocrisy. He mentally apologizes for his lie, but this is the only way to ensure a meeting with Sepia. Having lived his entire life in the form of a beast, he acquired an ability that no one knows about. He is able to see the true nature of a werewolf even through his human appearance. For example, he easily recognized the transformed wolf in the Duke just by looking into his eyes. Roxanne is the perfect male that Ettenzel has dreamed of becoming his whole life. He is probably the very embodiment of an ideal man and a strong leader. To retrieve Sepia from such a divine beast, you need to gain permanent access. Only in this way will he have a chance to displace his competitor and take his place next to the Empress. Meanwhile, the day began rather strangely, and the Emperor again changed his habits. He suddenly decides to honor Sepia with his visit, something that hasn't happened for a long time. Demios insists that she must know the reason for the unscheduled meeting. He demands to know what the document that the assistant brought this morning means. Sepia intends to formally establish the charity department and take on its management. After hearing the strange statement, he warns that such powers are given by the Emperor. The girl is quite prepared for such an answer, but this time she decides to act more boldly. She is the Empress of the land of werewolves and the Star of Ishtar, which means she has every right to do so. Demios always knew about her powers, but deliberately hid valuable information. One of the main laws states that the Empress can establish a department herself. It was only the visit of the Lady Viscountess that revealed the truth, when the woman hinted at her true rights. Now Sepia wants to know the truth, why her husband kept the information a secret all this time. He kept her in the dark, trying to make Sepia an obedient doll. In response, he orders the petition to be immediately withdrawn, otherwise it will be annulled. However, Demios is not entirely right, since 2 votes from the imperial family can legitimize the document. Even the votes of ordinary nobles, if there are at least 3 of them, can give such legitimacy. She had indeed studied the intricacies of the law quite well and was prepared in advance for a refusal. However, the Emperor warns that the nobles will not dare to go against their ruler. She won't get 2 votes from the imperial family either, since the palace won't support Sepia. At this moment, she reminds us that besides Demios himself, there is another heir. There is another member of the imperial family who could very well become an ally of the Empress. Right now, this person is here, having listened to the entire conversation to the very end. Turning around, he begins to understand why his wife has been meeting with the Duke all this time. However, if it were just a matter of voice, Roxanne would not have left her bedroom. They spent the whole morning discussing the new organization and are now ready to submit the petition. Sepia is convinced that the Duke is the best person to serve as her deputy. Immediately after this, Roxanne places the document on the table, hoping to get the Emperor's signature. From a legal point of view, everything is drawn up flawlessly, so there is no need to waste time. As a member of the imperial family, Roxanne favors independent budgetary powers. It is not surprising that this only awakens rage in the Emperor's soul. He is sure that with such actions, Sepia is again betraying her husband, replacing him with a lover. The most annoying thing is the fact that the role of lover fell to this particular person. It is difficult to convince Demios otherwise, although in fact, no one is in a hurry to do so. He believes that the Empress betrayed his heart, while the former took a mistress. Everyone around him is neglecting the Emperor, and he knows what the main reason is. The reason is that he does not have the very seal that symbolizes the true ruler. It is believed that the relic was lost due to the actions of the late Empress. Thus, Demios is the only emperor in history who did not have a seal. From the very beginning of his reign, this fact became the greatest shame and curse of the ruler. However, if he thinks that his wife has become distant only because of this, he is deeply mistaken. Moreover, she was one of the few who truly believed that the seal was missing. Lately, he has been hearing too many revelations that seem more like fakes. She must know that no ruler has ascended the throne without a relic. Most likely, it was deliberately hidden by the late emperor who wanted to see his eldest son on the throne. And yet, with or without the seal, he is still the acting ruler of the country. It's worth remembering this more often when he decides to cancel funding for a charitable foundation. Sepia did indeed reject him, but not because he decided to bring a mistress to the palace. And not because Demios once almost strangled his own wife. Oh no. The main reason is that the emperor renounced his people, treating them like animals. They just look at the world differently, and there are no trusting relationships in such a family. Sepia never wanted to hurt him and is unlikely to take her anger out on others. In response, he reminds him that Sepia doesn't even know what's really causing him pain. Seeing the two of them together, Demios immediately guessed that this man was his wife's lover. However, they lied, saying that in this way they wanted to deflect gossip from the Empress's name. As a result, Demios saw them together time and again, realizing that such a relationship could not be a game. After Roxanne's arrival, he began to feel a constant surge of wild rage. Demios doesn't even notice how a partial transformation has already happened before his wife's eyes. He barely touches her hand, but leaves a rather deep wound. The Duke understands that if he does not take the Empress away right now, he will completely complete the transformation. After some time, he puts a bandage on the wound that her husband inflicted in a fit of rage. There is no doubt that Demios is the one who kills animals in the forest. It must be said that the Duke did a wonderful job with the bandage, as if he had done this many times before. She is forced to resort to his help again, but for Roxanne it is quite dangerous. In response, he asks not to worry, he has long been accustomed to coping with difficulties. If we're talking about Demios, then the Emperor still won't be able to cause too much damage. Sepia asks to tell the truth about the clue left by the Scarlet King. It is known that before his death he wanted to warn members of the imperial family. Sepia also knows that the clue is somehow related to the map. She is right, because if you superimpose a map of the capital on a map of the empire, the drawing will turn into a relic. If you look closely, you can easily see the image of the family symbol. Drodion and his two eyes begin to gradually appear on the combined cards. It was no coincidence that Father left Roxana 2 mementos, knowing the Empress's intentions. The location of the golden eye is revealed by the underground storage of the imperial palace. The Duke first learns of this on the night of the celebration, when a charity evening was taking place. After going down into the vault, he spends some time trying to identify the hidden place. It is usually quite easy to detect by knocking on all the walls of the room. Almost immediately, Roxanne notices a place where the wall has an empty space behind it. This means that somewhere outside the room there is another one, hidden from outsiders. Of course, there is an easier way to get there without resorting to the help of servants. Having broken through the wall, the Duke stumbles upon a relic that was specially hidden from the Emperor. The wolf statue serves only as a disguise, while the relic is kept inside. It is not difficult to guess that in the wolf's mouth, there is what the secret room was created for. Already in the first seconds, Roxanne understands that there is another figure inside. Having received the valuable item, the brother will no longer be able to consider himself a true emperor. It's a pity that he only finds out about this now, when Demios has already managed to create a lot of problems. And yet the seal of Drodion is in his hands, and there is no longer any point in humiliating himself before the Emperor. This seal rightfully belongs to him, and only Roxanne has always been the true heir. Besides the seal, there is something else to find, but the Duke suggests discussing this later. Having found everything he needed, he promises to inform the Empress of the details of the matter. For a second it seemed to her that the Duke doubted, although he gave no reason to doubt. In any case, she thanks you for your help and is ready to share the joy of finding the seal. The palace map is no longer needed, so it should be returned to its owner. Without her help, he would not have been able to discover the relic hidden in the vault. It will be interesting to see whether the Duke will return the family estate or leave it to his brother. For some reason, Sepia is sure that he will leave immediately after the search is completed. There is no longer any reason to stay in the capital next to the hated brother. Such words can take him by surprise because Sepia knows very well about his feelings. The most compelling reason for him to stay here is his love for this girl. As long as the Empress is in the capital, he promises to always be there. He had said these words once before, but at that moment Sepia was forced to refuse. This man did enough to bring back the old conversation in the garden. Moreover, the Emperor's opinion no longer matters after the seal is found. This means that the Empire will soon celebrate a lavish wedding. 2 weeks later, Betty rushes to tell the news that the whole capital is talking about. Public opinion changed dramatically after the creation of the charitable foundation. In addition, the organization has recently been recognized by the Imperial Palace, and all thanks to the ruler, who is loved more than the Emperor himself. Although Betty is a little sad, because now there will be much more work at the foundation than before. At this moment, a certain gentleman asks to give him a couple of minutes. He assures that the matter will not take much time, although it is quite important. Of course, Captain Jasper was a hero of the country, and there was always time for him. Suddenly, something starts moving in his bag, as if the guy had brought an animal into the palace. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but there really is a fox inside the bag. She knows very well that the fox was not quite ordinary and had a human appearance. The boy asked his brother to wait inside, but Ettenzel was tired of being in the form of a fox. In fact, Jasper only came to thank Sepia for helping his brother. Only she was able to turn him into a human after meeting him during a walk. Meanwhile, there is another person in the room who is not at all against his visit. Sepia is well aware of her maid's feelings, which are written all over her face. The girl had been waiting for the squad to return for a long time so she could meet Jasper again. It would be better if he approached Betty first. This girl had always been too shy. This is probably the first time he has spoken about this so openly, although everything he said is true. Having decided that his brother can wait a little, the knight wants to settle one issue. As Sepia had warned, the maid had long been looking at this man as her chosen one. They are very compatible with each other, and it is clear that they will soon create the perfect couple. As for his brother, he will have to keep his word by turning him into a human. Just at the moment of touch, there is no need to imagine a human form. It is much easier to pet a small fox than to touch the body of an adult man. Realizing that the Empress was ready to do this, Ettenzel froze in anticipation of the transformation. To do this, you just need to stroke the fox's head a little. It's quite simple. It is difficult to discern which of the two essences is dominant in this werewolf. However, the fox behaves quite nicely, as